The cold was a constant, a clammy shroud woven from the sea spray and the Dementors' insidious chill. It seeped into Caleb Thorne's bones, then into the marrow, and finally into the very core of his soul. For months, it had been a slow, agonizing process, this erosion of self. The joyous memories, once vibrant beacons against the gloom, had long since faded to ash. Now, only the ashes remained, stirred endlessly by the unseen currents of despair. He lay curled on his stone slab, a skeletal parody of a man, his once proud Auror's frame reduced to sharp angles beneath threadbare robes. The crime, the magical creature incident he'd failed to prevent, played on a ceaseless loop in the hollow theater of his mind. The shrieks of the villagers, the collapsing stable, the horrifying glint of scales in the moonlight, it was all there, vivid as if it were happening an inch from his face, courtesy of the Dementors' relentless torment. He knew it wasn't real, not now, but the emotions were raw, bleeding, fresh. Guilt, failure, helplessness. These were his constant companions, and he was almost ready to welcome the sweet, final oblivion they promised. The Dementors themselves were a swirling darkness outside his barred window, their cloaked forms a perpetual smudge against the perpetually gray sky. Their presence was a pressure, a physical weight on his chest, squeezing the hope from his lungs. He could hear the low moans and whimpers from neighboring cells, the occasional guttural scream of a mind finally breaking. Soon, he knew it would be his turn. He was so tired. Then, the cold changed. It wasn't a gradual shift, but an instantaneous, seismic jolt that slammed into the very fabric of Azkaban. The air, already thick with despair, suddenly vibrated with a new, horrifying intensity. A color erupted in the oppressive gloom, searing itself into the very concept of misery, yellow. A malevolent, sickly yellow, not the cheerful hue of sunshine or daffodils, but the color of rot, of sickness, of bile. It pulsed, a sickening rhythm that beat against his eyeballs even through closed lids. The Dementors outside began to writhe, their cloaks flickering with this new, terrible luminescence. Their presence, once a draining chill, now became a focused, burning pressure, like 1,000 needles pricking his mind, each one injecting a concentrated dose of dread. The screams from other cells intensified, becoming sharper, more immediate, laced with a quality of terror Caleb had never heard before, even in this place. These weren't the cries of men losing their minds to slow desiccation. They were the visceral, panicked shrieks of men facing their worst nightmares made real. Caleb clutched his head, pressing his palms against his temples as if to hold his skull together. The images in his mind, already horrific, flared with a blinding, yellow-tinged clarity. The beast wasn't just a memory now, it was there. He heard the splintering wood of the stable, louder, clearer than any memory. The stench of hay and fear filled his nostrils. The shadow, massive and scaled, loomed over him, its eyes, now glowing with that same sickly yellow, fixated on him. He felt the tremor of its heavy footsteps, the hot, fetid breath on his face. The screams of the villagers weren't in his memory. They echoed from the very corners of a cell, distinct, individualized, calling his name, accusing him. "You failed us, Thorne. You let it happen," a woman's voice shrieked, her voice thick with terror. "Run, Caleb, run," a child's desperate plea, followed by a wet, sickening crunch. He wasn't just remembering, he was reliving. The Dementors, empowered by this new, alien force, were no longer simply draining happiness. They were projecting, crafting, forcing hyper-realistic fear constructs directly into his mind. His greatest failure wasn't a phantom. It was a breathing, roaring, consuming reality within the confines of his skull. He tried to cast a Patronus. The word expecto died on his tongue, a dry, dusty whisper. There was no joy to draw upon, no hope left to fuel the charm. Only the beast, towering, its yellow eyes burning into him, and the chilling chorus of accusations. He watched, helpless as his hands, the hands that had once held a wand capable of formidable magic, trembled, useless. He saw himself, younger, arrogant, falling to his knees as the creature tore through the village, a yellow haze of dread distorting the entire scene. The guilt, once a heavy cloak, was now a physical chain, binding him, crushing him. He heard other noises too, through the cacophony of his own personal hell. A man in the cell across from him, usually silent, began to babble hysterically about spiders the size of house elves, clawing at invisible webs. Another, a dark wizard notorious for his arrogance, sobbed uncontrollably, whimpering about being buried alive, a constant thump-thump-thump of earth hitting a coffin lid emanating from his cell. This wasn't mere despair. This was a targeted, personalized terror designed to shatter the mind in mere moments. This was what the wizarding world feared, amplified to an impossible degree, weaponized by something beyond their understanding. As the beast in his mind lunged, its fangs dripping with spectral venom, Caleb felt a strange, cold clarity pierce through the yellow haze. This was it. This was the end. His mind would break. He would join the mad chorus of Azkaban, and then oblivion. There was no fight left. No defiance. Just an acceptance, a weary surrender. A raspy voice, strangely calm amidst the storm of manufactured terror, cut through the din. It was faint, barely a whisper, but it registered, a discordant note in the symphony of screams. Fear, boy, the voice croaked, is a master, but only if you let it be. Caleb flinched, his head snapping up. He hadn't noticed anyone nearby, hadn't even registered the presence of another living soul. His eyes, bleary and bloodshot, struggled to focus through the yellow-tinged shadows. In the cell to his left, tucked away in the gloom, was Old Man Abernathy. Abernathy was a legend in Azkaban, a man who had been here so long his sentence felt less like a punishment and more like a permanent feature of the landscape. He was a wizened, ancient man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes milky with age but surprisingly keen. He had been here before the Dementors were even widely used as guards, had seen Azkaban in its rawest, most brutal form, and had endured. He sat cross-legged on his slab, seemingly unaffected by the yellow light or the amplified screams, his gaze fixed on Caleb. The beast in Caleb's mind snarled, its spectral claws inches from his face, yet Abernathy's voice, though quiet, was impossibly clear, cutting through the construct's roar. They paint your nightmares, don't they, boy? Make them real enough to touch. Real enough to break you. Abernathy's voice was like grinding stones, old and resonant. But a painting, no matter how vivid, is still just paint. The words, simple as they were, struck a nerve. Caleb stared at Abernathy, searching for a trick, a hidden meaning, anything to make sense of this new horror and this old man's unnerving composure. How could he be so calm? His own beast was still snarling, the screams of the villagers still echoing, but for a split second, a minuscule crack appeared in the overwhelming wall of terror. Abernathy leaned forward slightly, his ancient eyes locking with Caleb's. What do you truly fear, Thorne? The monster? Or the man who let it win? The question hit Caleb harder than any spell. He feared the beast, yes, but Abernathy was right. His ultimate fear wasn't the creature itself, it was his own perceived inadequacy, his failure, his guilt. He was afraid of being the man who couldn't protect, the Auror who fell short. The Dementors, or whatever commanded them now, understood this intimately. It's not real, Caleb whispered, his voice hoarse, a desperate plea to himself. Oh, it's real enough to make you give up, Abernathy retorted, a hint of steel in his voice. But what does your fear want from you, boy? To break? To succumb? Or to rise? The beast roared again, a cacophony of accusation. It loomed, its shadow consuming him. But this time, as he stared into its spectral eyes, a flicker ignited deep within Caleb's chest. It was small, a dying ember, but it was there. Abernathy's words, his steady gaze, seemed to somehow ground Caleb, offering a fleeting anchor in the raging sea of his fear. To rise? How could he rise when he was already on his knees, when every fiber of his being screamed surrender? Yet, the thought itself, the audacity of it, was like a breath of fresh air in his suffocating despair. The yellow light intensified, the screams of his fellow prisoners reaching a fever pitch. The beast in his mind lunged again, its fangs bared. But this time, something was different. Instead of shrinking, instead of preparing for the final surrender, Caleb felt a tremor of something else. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was anger. A simmering, defiant rage at being pushed this far, at being subjected to this utterly monstrous, amplified torment. He might be broken, he might be consumed by guilt, but was he truly ready to just end? To let this new, alien terror win without even a whisper of a fight? His eyes, still fixed on Abernathy, held a question, a desperate plea for understanding. Abernathy merely smiled, a thin, knowing curve of his lips. "They feed on your fear, Thorne," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But fear, like any power, can be turned." Caleb didn't understand. He felt only the overwhelming, crushing weight of his personalized terror, the suffocating presence of his failure made manifest. But in that moment, as the beast closed in, he didn't close his eyes. He didn't cower. He stared back, a raw, primal spark of defiance igniting in his soul. He didn't know how he would fight, but for the first time in months, he knew he would. He wouldn't let it win. Not yet. Not like this. The beast in his mind screamed. But so, too, did a nascent, terrified part of Caleb's own spirit, refusing to break. The real battle had only just begun. The gnawing despair in Caleb Thorne's gut had festered into a raw, burning defiance. Abernathy's words, a faint echo against the roar of his inner terror, had somehow lodged themselves deeper than the Dementors' icy tendrils. "Fear is a current, lad. You can drown in it, or you can learn to swim." Caleb had felt himself flailing in that current for weeks, but now a strange, nascent stroke of resilience began to stir within him. The cacophony of Azkaban had escalated to an unbearable pitch. The screams were no longer just the mournful wails of lost hope. They were sharp, piercing cries of existential horror. Prisoners clawed at their faces, tore at their hair, or simply lay catatonic, eyes wide with visions only they could see. The Dementors, once mere shadows, now shimmered with an unnatural, sickly yellow aura, their presence radiating a cold, palpable wrongness that hummed through the very stone of the prison. Each passing meant a fresh wave of despair, accompanied by a glimpse of his worst nightmares. The terrified eyes of the villagers he'd failed to protect, the creatures maw-snapping, the scarlet stain on the snow. One morning, if such a concept still existed in the timeless void of Azkaban, a strange tapping started from the cell adjacent to his own. Not the frantic, panicked scratching of a man driven mad, but a measured, rhythmic series of taps. Caleb, who had been attempting to focus on the cold, hard reality of his cell walls, counting the imperfections in the mortar, strained to listen. Tap, 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 tap. It sounded like some archaic code. He recognized it. Old Azkaban inmates had used a variation of Morse code, adapted for those without the strength to articulate. His heart, long dormant, gave a faint flutter. Someone was still coherent. He tapped back hesitantly, 3 quick taps, the universal sign for, "Are you there?" A pause, then a rapid succession of taps, intricate and precise. Caleb focused, translating in his mind, though it had been years since he'd needed to decipher such a message. "You resist." "How?" Caleb frowned. His resistance was barely a spark, a desperate thrashing against drowning. He wasn't sure how to explain it in taps. He tried, fury, madness, will. The reply came swiftly. Insufficient. Observe. Explain. Collaborate. Alara. Alara Vance. The name sparked a memory. A Ravenclaw, highly intelligent, a bit eccentric, imprisoned for some bizarre experiment involving advanced mental projections. He'd heard whispers of her case in the Auror department, a research project gone awry, causing mass hallucinations in a secluded village, though thankfully harmless ones. The ministry, ever cautious, had thrown the book at her for reckless manipulation of sentient minds. "Alara," Caleb whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You're alive." He spent the next few hours, then days, communicating with her through the wall. Her tapped messages were a torrent of scientific inquiry mixed with magical theory, startlingly coherent amidst the madness. She wasn't just observing the Dementors, she was analyzing them. "The Dementors are different," she tapped one morning. "They're still Dementors, feeding on despair. But their range, their intensity, the specificity of the fear constructs, it's unnatural. Not purely magical. Caleb tapped back. What do you mean, not purely magical? The manifestations, Alara responded. They are too vivid, too tailored. They touch on precisely the most vulnerable points of each individual's psyche. This is beyond typical Dementor abilities. There is an external amplifier manipulating their core function, twisting the very fabric of our minds. Caleb remembered the yellow glow, the impossible clarity of his visions. He told her about it, about Sinestro, about the name he'd heard whispered by the constructs. Her tapping grew more frantic. Sinestro. The yellow despair. An alien entity. A power ring. My God, it makes sense. He's using Azkaban as a laboratory. The Dementors are merely conduits, lenses through which he projects amplified, personalized fear constructs. The ring draws strength from the fear it generates. He's not just feeding on despair, he's cultivating it, refining it, making it more potent. The revelation hit Caleb with the force of a stunner. An alien. A power ring. His logical, Auror-trained mind reeled. It was too fantastic, too far removed from the mundane criminal cases he'd dealt with. Yet, the evidence was all around them. The escalating horror, the precision of the tortures. Why? Caleb tapped, a single, desperate question. To understand fear. To master it. Perhaps to weaponize it on a grander scale. This is a scientific experiment of terror, Alara replied, a chilling detachment in her tone that belied the horror of her words. He's not just creating fear, he's studying our responses to it. He's looking for breaking points, for vulnerabilities, but perhaps also for something else. Something in the defiance. That last part resonated with Caleb, stirring Abernathy's words back to the forefront of his mind. Mastering fear. How do we fight it? Caleb tapped. Alara's reply was slower this time, more thoughtful. A conventional Patronus would be useless against an amplified Dementor and the sheer mental assault of a power ring. It's like trying to stop a tidal wave with a teacup. The only way to disrupt a mental projection of this magnitude is to understand its source, its fuel, and its mechanism. He feeds on fear. What if we don't give him what he wants? Don't give him fear? Caleb tapped, incredulous. How can we not? It's crushing us. Not simply not fear, Alara explained, but to change its nature. To take the raw power of fear, the energy it generates, and redirect it. To turn it from a paralyzing poison into a galvanizing force. My old experiments were about projecting mental states, manipulating the psyche from within. If he is projecting fear, we must project defiance back, not just as a feeling, but as a deliberate act of will. We need to learn to ride the current, Caleb. She was suggesting he actively engage with his fear, not just resist it passively. It sounded insane, yet it was the only thing that offered even a sliver of hope. Their plan began to form, cobbled together through whispered taps and the stark reality of their horrifying prison. It wasn't about escape yet, not truly. It was about survival, about cultivating a new kind of resilience, a way to build mental barriers and, perhaps, even find a loophole in Sinestro's horrifying equation. Their first tests were brutal. Alara, having observed the patterns, suggested mental exercises. Visualize the fear construct. Do not run. Do not cower. Analyze it. What does it look like? What does it smell like? What are its edges? Is it truly real, or is it a projection? Caleb, gritting his teeth, closed his eyes and forced himself to confront the vision that haunted him daily, the Snagglefang beast, its teeth dripping venom, its eyes burning with hunger, and behind it, the faces of the families he'd failed, their accusations silent but deafening. This wasn't the blurry, indistinct terror of an ordinary Dementor. This was a hyperreal, 4D horror. He felt the familiar claw of panic, the crushing weight of guilt. But this time, he remembered Alara's instructions. Analyze it. He focused on the beast's scales. Were they truly rough, or did his mind only perceive them as such? The villager's eyes, were they accusing him, or was he projecting his own self-loathing onto their spectral forms? The effort was excruciating. His head throbbed, his stomach churned, and a cold sweat drenched him. He nearly broke, nearly succumbed to the familiar embrace of despair. He saw himself curling into a ball, begging for the Dementors to finish him. But then, Abernathy's voice, surprisingly clear, cut through the fog. "The current, lad. Feel it, but don't become it." Caleb gasped, reopening his eyes. He was still in his cell, shaking violently, but he hadn't lost himself entirely. He hadn't stopped breathing. He tapped furiously against the wall. It worked. "I almost broke, but I didn't. I felt its edges, its unreality. It's still terrifying, but I saw the seams." Ilara's reply was immediate, a flurry of excited taps. "Excellent. The mind is a powerful weapon, Caleb. Sinestro uses our fear against us, but if we can perceive the construct as what it is, an illusion, however potent, then we can begin to gain control. We are not fighting the beast, we are fighting the projection of the beast. There's a crucial difference." The next day, Ilara pushed him further. "Now, once you recognize the construct as a projection, try to imagine yourself manipulating it. Not dispelling it, that will take immense power, but changing its focus. Imagine the creature's roar, instead of terrifying you, becoming a distant echo. Imagine its eyes, instead of accusatory, becoming merely reflective. You are the observer, not the victim." Caleb tried again, summoning the Snagglefang. This time, the fear was still immense, but less absolute. He focused on the beast's roar, which still threatened to deafen him. He pictured it in his mind, then, with every ounce of his will, tried to push it away, to dull its edges, to make it recede. A scream tore from his throat. The beast resisted. Its roar grew louder, its spectral form lunged, its fangs impossibly close to his face. He collapsed, clutching his head, convinced his skull would crack. He lay there for a long time, trembling, breathing heavily, the phantom stench of fear still in his nostrils. "I failed," he tapped, despair creeping back in. It fought back. It was too strong. Ilara's response was unexpected. "You didn't fail. You provoked it. You confirmed its sentience, or at least the sentience of the power behind it. Sinestro is aware. Your defiance is a tremor in his carefully controlled experiment. This is good, Caleb. It means you're on the right track. You are not meant to defeat it yet, only to understand its limits and your own. And mine." Caleb frowned. "Yours?" "I have been practicing too," Ilara tapped. "My own fears are different, not of failure, but of madness, of being trapped in my own mental labyrinth. I try to navigate the pathways Sinestro creates, to find the edges of his projections, to map his prison within the prison. We need to find the nexus of his power, Caleb, the point where the projections originate. If we can reach that, we can disrupt his entire operation." A cold dread, entirely distinct from Sinestro's terror, settled over Caleb. He realized what Ilara was suggesting. They weren't just learning to survive, they were learning to fight back. And in doing so, they were drawing Sinestro's attention. This wasn't merely a desperate attempt at mental resilience, it was an act of war. An act that could cost them not just their minds, but their very lives. As if in answer to his thought, a new, more horrifying sound ripped through Azkaban. Not a scream of despair, but a guttural, furious roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the island. It was deep, resonating, and infused with a distinct, unsettling yellow energy. It was a roar of anger, of frustration. Sinestro knew. And he was not pleased. The prison, already a hell, seemed to twist and contort further. The shadows in Caleb's cell deepened, swirling into indistinct, menacing shapes. The air grew heavy, thick with oppressive anticipation. This wasn't a Dementor's chill, it was something far more primal, far more alien. Then, from the darkness of his cell, a spectral hand, impossibly large and formed of pure, glowing yellow light, stretched out towards him, its fingers like talons, radiating palpable, intelligent fury. It wasn't a mere construct of his past fears. It was a projection of Sinestro's own wrath, a direct, terrifying message to the defiant inmate who dared to push back against the master of fear. The testing phase was over. The game had begun. The air in Caleb's cell vibrated with an unnatural tension, the usual Dementor-induced chill now a sharp, anticipatory dread. The moment had come. Ilara, her usually meticulous hair a wild halo from restless nights, tapped a complex rhythm on the wall. Across the narrow corridor, Caleb tapped back, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. Abernathy, a shadow in the corner of his own cell, merely hummed, a low, tuneless drone that somehow calmed Caleb more than any reassurance. "Remember the pattern, Caleb," Alara's whispered voice, amplified by a subtle acoustic charm, cut through the gloom. "When the surge hits maximum, not a second before. The resonance will be brief, but vital." Their plan was audacious, born of desperation and Alara's unique insight into Sinestro's methodology. Sinestro's power ring, while amplifying fear, also created a fluctuating energy field. Alara had detected a specific harmonic frequency during the peak surges of dread, a brief window where the amplified fear itself could be momentarily disrupted, creating a ripple in the fabric of the prison's magical dampeners. It was a perilous gambit. Miss the window, and they'd be atomized by backlash or swarmed by enraged Dementors. A low, guttural shriek echoed from the deeper levels of Azkaban, the raw, animalistic terror of a prisoner succumbing. It was their cue. The Dementors, sensing the surge of emotion, swooped lower, their icy breath a tangible presence. Caleb felt his worst memories beginning to crystallize, the terrified screams of villagers, the roar of the monstrous erumpent, the cold, accusing eyes of the Wizengamot. He pushed it down, his mantra from Abernathy echoing in his mind. Acknowledge it, but do not embrace it. No. Alara's voice was sharp, cutting through the rising tide of despair. Caleb raised his wand, axioed to his hand moments before, and focused. He didn't cast a spell of raw power, but one of pure, defiant will. A surge of protego amplified not by hope, but by a resolute refusal to break. He imagined his fear, not as a weakness, but as a current. He would not drown in it, he would redirect its force. A faint, shimmering ripple spread from his cell wall, meeting Alara's similar pulse. For a microsecond, the oppressive yellow haze seemed to flicker, the Dementors recoiled, and the ancient iron of their cell doors vibrated with an unholy shriek of protest. The magical locks, designed to withstand the ages, twisted and groaned under the chaotic energy, then shattered, molten metal dripping to the floor. "Go!" Abernathy's voice, surprisingly strong, urged them forward. Caleb burst from his cell, wand aloft. The corridor was a living nightmare. Dementors darted like predatory shadows, their cloaks whipping, but it was Sinestro's constructs that truly held sway. Prisoners, some catatonic, others screaming incoherently, writhed on the floor, battling phantoms only they could see. A hulking, six-legged spider, its fangs dripping venom, crawled across the ceiling, a manifestation of arachnophobia made terrifyingly real. Further down, a group of inmates huddled, terrified of an invisible, crushing weight. "Stay focused," Alara cried, scrambling from her cell, a glowing runic diagram already forming on her palm. Sinestro will have anticipated a move, but not this specific disruption. Their initial objective was the central spiral staircase, a notoriously difficult choke point. As they sprinted, dodging panicked inmates and the flitting Dementors, the very air around Caleb began to coalesce. The temperature plummeted, and a sickly yellow luminescence pulsed directly in his path. It began subtly, the familiar scent of damp earth and burnt hide, the faint, disembodied cries he'd heard that night. Then it solidified. A towering, spectral image of the erumpent, its horn glowing with destructive energy, materialized directly before him. But this was no mere memory. This construct was imbued with his guilt. Its eyes, not the feral madness of a beast, but the sorrowful, condemning gaze of the victims he'd failed to save. Behind it, spectral figures of the villagers, their faces contorted in agony and accusation, reached out to him, their voices a cacophony of his failures. "You let them die," Auror Thorne, a voice, impossibly deep and resonant, echoed from the erumpent's maw, Sinestro's voice layered within. "Your duty, your oath, broken." Caleb faltered, his stride breaking. The weight of his past crime, the injustice of his imprisonment, pressed down on him with crushing force. He saw the courtroom, the Wizengamot condemning him, not for failure, but for malice. He saw his wand snapping, his badge torn away. He was not a hero, but a broken man, a failure, just as they said. The fear was absolute, paralyzing him. "Caleb, snap out of it." Elara's voice, though sharp, seemed distant, drowned out by the accusations. She blasted a minor charm at the spectral villagers, but it passed through them harmlessly. "It's not real. It's tailored to your mind." Abernathy, surprisingly agile, grabbed Caleb's arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Look past the reflection, lad. The beast you see is not the one that took them. It is the beast in you that grieves. But grief is not weakness. It is the fuel for resolve." The erumpent construct pulsed, its condemning gaze intensifying. Its spectral horn lowered, pointing directly at Caleb's chest, threatening to pierce not his flesh, but his very soul. The voices of the dead grew louder, a chorus of despair. "No, I didn't let them die." The thought, small and defiant, sparked in Caleb's mind. "I fought. I failed, yes, but I fought with everything I had." He remembered the rage, the frustration, the feeling of being utterly overwhelmed by a force beyond his control. That frustration had festered into guilt, but now a new emotion stirred, a furious refusal to be broken by this manipulation. Sinestro was using his past, his vulnerability, to cripple him. And Caleb Thorne wouldn't have it. "You want my despair, Sinestro?" Caleb's voice, hoarse at first, grew in strength, echoing the outrage building within him. "You will not have it. You will have my fury." He channeled the adrenaline, the fear that still clawed at his gut, not into panic, but into a roaring defiance. He remembered Abernathy's cryptic advice: fear is a current. Learn to swim with it or against it. He would swim against it. He would use the raw, primal energy of his terror and transform it. His wand snapped up. Expecto Patronum. But it was no ordinary Patronus. The silver stag that burst forth from his wand was not merely a shield of hope. It was edged with a fierce, yellow-tinged aura, not from Sinestro's ring, but from Caleb's own raw, transmuted fear. It was the Patronus of a man who had stared into the abyss of his deepest anxieties and refused to yield, who had weaponized his trauma into pure, unadulterated resolve. The stag charged, its antlers glowing with a defiant light, not merely warding off the Dementors, but goring the erumpent construct. The spectral beast roared, a sound of agony mixed with surprise. The villagers' accusations dissolved into whimpers. Caleb felt the profound psychic backlash as his defiance struck true. The construct was fear, and his counter was not happiness, but a furious, unyielding rejection of that fear. The erumpent flickered, its form wavering like smoke. "That's it, Caleb." Elara cheered, her face alight with understanding. "You're starving it. It feeds on your despair, not your will." Caleb pushed harder, his mind a steel trap focused on the injustice, the need to escape, to expose this horror. He wouldn't just fight, he would dominate his own fear. The Patronus, infused with this new, potent energy, slammed into the erumpent one last time. With a wail that resonated with Sinestro's own frustration, the construct imploded into a shower of yellow light, dissipating into nothingness. The corridor seemed to exhale. The Dementors, though still present, seemed to recoil further, unable to contend with the sheer force of Caleb's defiant will. Other prisoners, witnessing the impossible, gasped, a few even stirring from their catatonia. "The stairs, quickly," Abernathy urged, pulling Caleb forward. "He knows now. He knows you're not like the others." They scrambled towards the central staircase, past more personalized horrors that seemed to shrink in the wake of Caleb's powerful display. He was no longer just running. He was leading, his Patronus a defiant beacon against the encroaching dread. As they reached the base of the massive spiraling stairs, the prison seemed to hold its breath. The yellow light of Sinestro's ring pulsed with renewed intensity, bathing the very air in a palpable sense of anger. A chillingly calm, melodic voice echoed through the vast stone chamber, carrying on the amplified air, a voice filled with cruel amusement. "Impressive, Auror Thorne. You harness your despair well. But defiance is merely another form of fear, is it not? Fear of being broken. Let us see if you can survive the true horror I have prepared for you." From the top of the spiraling staircase, bathed in a sickly yellow light, a new construct began to form. This one was not a personal memory, but a towering, grotesque amalgamation of all the prison's fears, a multi-limbed shadow beast with far too many eyes and a maw that pulsed with raw dread. It blocked their path entirely, an impossible, insurmountable barrier. And above it, a figure appeared, a silhouette against the oppressive yellow glow, its form unmistakable. Sinestro, watching them with a chilling smile, his yellow ring blazing like a miniature sun. Let the games truly begin. The air in Azkaban pulsed with a sickening, vibrant yellow, a color that tasted of fear and acid on Caleb's tongue. Sinestro hovered above the central courtyard, his yellow power ring gleaming like a malevolent star. Around him, the prison churned, a maelstrom of spectral torment where Dementors, their auras amplified, conjured nightmarish visions that tore at the sanity of hundreds. This was it. The moment of truth. "You continue to surprise me, Thorne." Sinestro's voice resonated, not just through the air, but directly into Caleb's mind, cold and amused. Most would have shattered by now. "Your despair, it's robust." A fascinating specimen. Caleb felt the familiar tendrils of terror trying to coil around his heart. The courtyard manifested as the scene of his greatest failure. The chaotic London street, the rampaging Grindylows, the terrified screams of the innocent he'd failed to protect, their faces twisted in agony and blame. But this time, the faces weren't just memories, they were fully formed constructs of yellow light, reaching for him, their accusations echoing Sinestro's words. "I won't break," Caleb snarled, his wand clutched tight. The fear was there, a roaring furnace in his gut, but it wasn't consuming him. He had stared into its maw, walked through its flames, and now he understood. Fear wasn't an enemy to be banished. It was a current, a raw, primal energy. And Sinestro had shown him how to swim in it. He closed his eyes for a split second, drawing on Abernathy's cryptic lessons, on Alara's analytical breakdowns of Sinestro's energy signatures. The fear was powerful, yes, but its power lay in its ability to paralyze. If it didn't paralyze, if it merely existed, then its nature changed. It became a sharp edge, a focused intensity. When Caleb opened his eyes, the terror constructs of the Grindylow victims were still there, screaming, clawing. But now he saw them with a strange clarity, their forms flickering at the edges, revealing the raw yellow energy that fueled them. He didn't try to banish them with a conventional Patronus. Instead, he channeled the intense focus born from his own fear, the desperate will to survive and protect. "Expecto Patronum," he roared, but the light that burst from his wand wasn't the silvery, corporeal form of a stag or an otter. It was a wave of pure, shimmering defiance, an incandescent white gold energy that didn't just repel the fear constructs, but absorbed their yellow light, momentarily destabilizing them. It wasn't happiness, not anymore. It was the raw, unyielding will to fight for it. Sinestro's smile faltered, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his alien features. An interesting adaptation. You're not just resisting, you're repurposing. Truly remarkable. The alien master of fear decided to escalate. He raised his ring, and the entire courtyard twisted. The walls of Azkaban melted into grotesque, shifting faces, all screaming Caleb's name, their eyes burning with yellow accusation. Giant chains of pure dread, thick as ancient oak trees, sprang from the ground, lashing out at him. These weren't just psychological tricks, they were physical constructs of solidified fear, capable of crushing bone. "Let's see if your defiance can withstand this," Sinestro sneered, a massive, multi-limbed creature, a manifestation of Caleb's deepest doubt and guilt, coalescing behind him. It was part Dementor, part Grindylow, part the disapproving face of his former Auror mentor, all malice and judgment. Caleb met its gaze. He remembered the shame, the helplessness, the crushing weight of public condemnation. He let the feelings surge, acknowledged them, then pushed past them. "I did fail then," he admitted aloud, his voice clear amidst the cacophony. "But I won't fail now." He didn't cast a defensive spell. Instead, he channeled the energy of his own resolve, the burning desire to expose Sinestro, to clear his name, to ensure no one else suffered this fate. He pointed his wand not at the creature, but at the ground, then swept it upwards in a wide arc. A ripple of the same white-gold energy erupted, creating a temporary, shimmering barrier that held the monster at bay, not with repulsion, but with sheer, unyielding willpower. Meanwhile, in the deeper, more labyrinthine sections of Azkaban, Alara Vance was a whirlwind of focused energy. Her usually wild Ravenclaw hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat, but her eyes gleamed with fierce concentration. Abernathy, surprisingly agile for his age, moved beside her, a spectral guide through the pandemonium. The surge in ambient fear energy from Caleb's confrontation with Sinestro is creating a localized distortion field, Alara explained rapidly, tapping her wand against a pulsating yellow vein of light snaking along the corridor. It's interfering with Sinestro's ability to maintain the Dementor amplification across all levels simultaneously. There are momentary blind spots, windows of opportunity. Lass, the beast is distracted, Abernathy rasped, his eyes twinkling. A man facing his demons truly draws a crowd, even a cruel one. He pointed to a group of catatonic prisoners, curled up in their cells. We won't wake them all, but the ones whose spirits still flicker, give them a reason. Alara didn't hesitate. Fidelius Impervia, she incanted, a complex spell she'd been working on, combining shielding charms with a short-range, targeted mental suggestion. It wasn't strong enough to completely break the despair, but it projected a sliver of hope, a whisper of freedom, into the minds of those capable of grasping it. As Caleb's defiant Patronus energy pulsed through the prison, some of the Dementors, caught in the wake of the unusual counterforce, reeled back, confused. Their individualized fear constructs flickered, momentarily dissolving. In those brief windows, a few prisoners, jolted by Alara's spell and the fading terror, stirred. This way. Follow the light. Abernathy bellowed, his voice surprisingly strong, pointing with a gnarled finger towards an ancient, rusted gate that Alara was now furiously working on. Sparks flew as she blasted arcane energy at its wards, exploiting the distortion Sinestro's power had created. The confrontation between Caleb and Sinestro was now a ballet of devastation. Caleb dodged a construct that formed into an ethereal noose, then deflected a bolt of concentrated fear energy with a rapid, almost instinctual protego totalum that pulsed with his own empowered defiance. He wasn't just defending, he was learning, adapting, using the intense pressure to sharpen his senses and magic. Sinestro, for the first time, looked genuinely irritated. You are squandering your potential, Thorne. Imagine what you could achieve if you embraced my vision of order, if you wielded fear instead of merely defying it. He extended his hand, and the giant doubt monster behind him lunged, its spectral claws aimed for Caleb's heart. Caleb stood his ground. He didn't flinch. Instead, he remembered Abernathy's words, "Fear is a storm. You cannot stop it, but you can learn to sail." He gathered every ounce of his courage, his rage at injustice, his burning desire for freedom. He imagined himself as a lighthouse in the storm, a beacon. He focused his will, not on destroying the monster, but on understanding it. It was a manifestation of his fear. If he could control his fear, could he not control its construct? With a guttural shout, Caleb thrust his wand forward. I control my fear. I control you. The white gold energy didn't blast the monster. Instead, it struck its core, and for a terrifying moment, the creature buckled, twisting in agony. It wasn't being destroyed, it was being wrestled. Caleb was taking control of Sinestro's own weapon, turning his amplified fear against him. Sinestro roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. The yellow light around him intensified, and he unleashed a barrage of physical constructs, spears of solidified terror, walls of despair, a whirlwind of menacing faces, all directed at Caleb, trying to overwhelm his singular defiance. This was no longer an experiment, it was a battle. Down below, the ancient gate groaned, then exploded inward under Alara's relentless assault, showering sparks. Abernathy was already ushering the handful of conscious prisoners through the breach. To the boats. They're still docked on the north side, he urged, his voice cracking but resolute. The escapees, a motley crew of dazed wizards and witches, stumbled through, some glancing back at the impossible battle raging above. Caleb, fighting for not just himself but for their fragile hope, parried, dodged, and channeled. He felt the immense drain, the raw energy expenditure, but the thought of Sinestro winning, of Azkaban remaining a laboratory of dread, fueled him. Sinestro, sensing the momentum shift, the prison's weakening integrity, and the defection of his test subjects, snarled. "This is not over, Thorne. You may have learned to embrace your fear, but the universe is vast, and I am its master." With a final, explosive burst of yellow energy, he conjured a massive, spectral fist that slammed into the central tower, sending cracks spiderwebbing across the ancient stone. The prison began to collapse. Caleb felt the ground tremble, the air scream. He knew he couldn't defeat Sinestro here. Not fully, not yet. His goal was escape, to expose, to survive. Sinestro, too, seemed to realize the tactical shift. He would rather retreat and preserve his power than risk being caught in the collapsing structure or waste energy on a single, defiant prisoner. With a final, contemptuous glare, Sinestro formed a golden portal of light and vanished, his chilling laughter echoing through the crumbling stones. The Dementors, no longer amplified, no longer bound by Sinestro's will, reverted to their more natural, but still horrifying, state, drifting aimlessly through the chaos. Caleb didn't wait. He launched himself towards the newly opened breach, his mind alight with a fierce, cold resolve. Azkaban was falling, and he was rising from its ashes. He burst through the gateway, joining the ragged procession led by Alara and Abernathy. The sea wind, cold and sharp, hit his face, smelling of salt and freedom. Behind them, the fortress of Azkaban groaned, its ancient stones succumbing to the cataclysm of Sinestro's power and Caleb's defiance. He was out, but the world outside was oblivious. The wizarding world still believed in Dementors and despair, not cosmic fearmongers and yellow power rings. Caleb Thorne, no longer a broken man, but a vessel of defiant hope, knew his true fight had only just begun. The sea spray on his face tasted not just of salt, but of a terrifying, exhilarating future. The very foundations of Azkaban groaned, a symphony of torment and dissolution that echoed the dying screams of Sinestro's ambition. Great chunks of the obsidian fortress, weakened by Sinestro's power and the sheer force of Caleb's defiance, cracked and peeled away like scales from a serpent. Dust and debris rained down, mingling with the chilling mist of retreating Dementors, whose amplified horror had abruptly, mercifully, lessened with Sinestro's failing grip. Caleb stood amidst the chaos, his body screaming in protest from the direct confrontation with Sinestro, but his mind, remarkably, was clear. The yellow light of fear that had once paralyzed him now felt like a familiar hum, a background note in the symphony of his own resilience. Sinestro, enraged and wounded, had unleashed a final, desperate volley of constructs, monstrous, multi-limbed horrors of pure terror, before retreating into a shimmering portal of sickly green and yellow light. He hadn't fled in defeat, Caleb knew, but in strategic withdrawal, a promise of future, more refined terror. His parting words, a sneering whisper that echoed in Caleb's mind, confirmed it. "You've merely won a battle, Thorne. The war for your world's fear has just begun. Move." "Now." Caleb's voice, raw but firm, cut through the din. He didn't have to consciously project his will. The prisoners, a motley collection of witches and wizards, some still weeping, some numb with shock, instinctively responded to the unwavering strength in his tone. He no longer felt the need to shout. His presence, his defiance, was enough. Alara Vance, her usually neat hair wild with soot and sweat, materialized at his side, her wand glowing with a strong Lumos Maxima. "The upper levels are collapsing faster. We need to push towards the east wall." Abernathy found a weakened section from the ancient sea enchantments. "It won't hold long." Her analytical mind, even in this maelstrom, was a beacon. "How many?" Caleb started, but Alara shook her head, her face grim. "Too many lost. But enough remain. Abernathy is already leading them." They pressed forward, a desperate tide against the collapsing fortress. Caleb, seeing a path blocked by a new fear construct, a towering, skeletal Dementor that writhed with phantom limbs, didn't hesitate. He thrust his wand forward, not with a spell of light, but with an intense surge of his own mastered fear. The construct, expecting to feed, recoiled. It flickered, momentarily destabilized by the sheer, controlled will behind Caleb's intent. It was like trying to drink water only to find it had solidified into a diamond. With that momentary opening, Alara hurled a powerful bombarda, blasting a hole right through its chest, and the construct dissolved into sickly yellow smoke. "That's new," Alara murmured, impressed and slightly disturbed. Using fear against fear itself. Brilliant and terrifying. Caleb only grunted, urging the prisoners through the gap. He was no longer afraid of the Dementor's chill, nor of the construct's horrific forms. He saw them for what they were, manifestations of an external force, not his own inner truth. This was his fear now, honed and directed. He used it as a shield, as a weapon, manifesting brief, defensive flares of yellow energy that repelled debris or momentarily blinded stray Dementors. They found Old Man Abernathy near the eastern ramparts, a surprisingly nimble shadow in the flickering light. He was guiding a small group of prisoners, some of whom looked barely conscious, through a narrow, precariously balanced corridor. His eyes, usually clouded, held a bright, fierce gleam. "Thorne. Vance. Good. The path is open, but the sea is hungry." Below them, the churning, black waters of the North Sea crashed against the island's base, a hungry maw waiting. The air, now free of Sinestro's amplified malice, still hummed with residual Dementor chill, but it was bearable, the familiar oppressive weight returning after the unimaginable horror had lifted. Abernathy pointed his gnarled finger at a section of the wall, already partially crumbled from the ongoing destruction. Just beyond that, a sheer drop. "But I sense a pocket of stable magic. A brief moment to cast a collective arresto momentum." Caleb looked at the ragged faces around him, murderers, thieves, political prisoners, and the wrongly accused. They were traumatized, but a spark of desperate hope had ignited in their eyes. "We jump. Together." His words were not a question, but a declaration. "Alara, Abernathy, coordinate the spell. I'll make sure everyone gets out." One by one, they reached the precipice. Caleb stood at the edge, pushing them forward, reassuring them with a hand on a shoulder, a firm gaze. He was the shepherd, leading his flock from the jaws of hell. As the last prisoner, a trembling old man, plunged into the void, Abernathy and Alara chanted, their wands arcing with shimmering blue light. The spell took hold, slowing their descent, allowing them to hit the frigid waves with a jarring splash rather than a fatal impact. Caleb jumped last, feeling the rush of wind, the spray of the sea, the cold. But it was an external cold, not the internal desolation. He hit the water, the shock stealing his breath, but not his will. His magic, fueled by adrenaline and a potent sense of victory, flared. He conjured a rough, temporary raft from a floating piece of debris, using the yellow light to bind it together, and hauled himself and several weaker prisoners onto it. Other escapees were already swimming or conjuring their own meager supports. They drifted away from the collapsing monstrosity of Azkaban. In the gray light of dawn, the fortress slowly disintegrated, a final, defiant roar swallowed by the hungry sea. It was over. Azkaban was no more. Hours later, the survivors, battered and exhausted, made landfall on a remote, rocky stretch of coast. They were a sight to behold, ragged, haunted, but undeniably free. It wasn't long before the first Auror patrols, alerted by the catastrophic collapse of Azkaban and the sudden influx of Dementor activity across the North Sea, arrived. Chaos erupted. Disbelief, fear, and bewilderment warred on the Auror's faces. A prison believed impregnable, gone. A mass escape unprecedented in history. But Caleb, soaked to the bone, shivering, but standing tall, silenced the cacophony with a single, resonant word. Silence. His voice, though hoarse, carried an authority that brooked no argument. He stood before the bewildered Aurors, Alara at his side, Abernathy, a spectral presence behind them. My name is Caleb Thorne. I was imprisoned here. And what happened at Azkaban was not an escape. It was a desperate flight from something beyond your comprehension. The head Auror, a stern-faced witch named Amelia Bones, eyed him suspiciously. Thorne, you're a fugitive and a convicted criminal. Explain yourself. Caleb met her gaze, his own unwavering. No guilt. No fear. Only a fierce, unyielding clarity. Azkaban was taken over, head Auror. Not by dark wizards, not by a prison break. By an entity from another dimension. An alien. Sinestro. A collective gasp went through the Aurors. Some scoffed. An alien? One sneered. What in Merlin's name are you talking about, Thorne? Are you mad? I am not mad, Caleb replied calmly, his eyes sweeping over them. But I have seen madness. I have felt terror amplified 1,000-fold. Sinestro used the Dementors as an instrument, twisting their power, creating physical manifestations of fear itself. He was experimenting, perfecting his weapon in a secluded laboratory, using us as his test subjects. Ilara stepped forward, her mind already organizing the data. He used a power ring, a construct of pure energy, drawing strength from the fear he inflicted. He amplified the Dementor's aura, projecting bespoke illusions into the minds of prisoners, making their deepest phobias real. It wasn't magic as we know it, head Auror. It was something else entirely. A different kind of energy, a different kind of threat. Abernathy, silent until now, spoke, his voice raspy but clear. He broke Azkaban. Broke souls. He nearly broke Caleb. But he failed. Because Caleb learned to stand against his own fear. And you will too. Amelia Bones looked from the shattered, haunted faces of the escapees to Caleb's resolute stance, then to Ilara's urgent, scientific explanation. She saw the genuine terror in their eyes, the scars on their souls, and the impossible truth reflected in the distant, smoking ruins of Azkaban. The wizarding world, isolated and complacent, had believed itself safe, protected by its unique magic. Now, a profound, alien horror had ripped through that illusion. We have evidence, Caleb stated, though for now it was only his unyielding conviction. Testimonies. The very destruction of Azkaban itself. You must believe us. Sinestro is out there, and he seeks to turn this world, our world, into a playground of fear. The wizarding world was about to be rocked to its core. Caleb Thorne, once a broken man consumed by guilt and fear, now stood tall, a beacon of defiance. He was no longer just a prisoner seeking freedom. He was a messenger, a warning, and perhaps a new kind of leader for a world suddenly vulnerable to threats it never imagined. His name would no longer be synonymous with failure, but with the terrifying, exhilarating truth he brought. He had faced his own despair, mastered it, and emerged unburdened, ready to face whatever cosmic horror awaited. The escape was just the beginning. The real fight had just begun.